Millions of people across Turkey and Syria are left vulnerable to cold temperatures and disease, with many also suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. A second group of rescue workers from South Korea will head to Turkey tonight. Their mission will be identifying those most needing help and supporting the recovery effort. To take some of the economic burden off the public in South Korea, the cost of public services will be kept the same for the first half of the year. President Yoon Suk-yeol has also called on essential industries to step up efforts to ease inflation. 10 days have passed since the deadly earthquake in Turkey and Syria that has now killed more than 41,000 people. Millions are struggling to survive due to a lack of shelter, cold temperatures, and the risk of disease. Now, reports say many are also suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Our Lee Seung-jae with the latest.
Having survived the massive earthquakes that struck Turkey and Syria, at least 1 million people are currently displaced in Turkey, and millions more are without homes in Syria. According to Reuters, some of those displaced in Turkey are living in temporary shelters. Others are not so lucky, unable to find space in makeshift shelters. But they all face the risk of deteriorating health due to the cold temperatures and the spread of disease caused by a shortage of clean water.
We lost everything in the second earthquake. Our house is in ruins and is in no condition for us to enter. We tried to put together plastic sheets to create a makeshift tent so the children can take refuge from the wind and the cold. Because we're far away from the city center, we haven't been able to get access to food aid either.
Those with weakened immunity are also being exposed to a variety of infectious diseases, with children particularly vulnerable to waterborne illness. In response, the Turkish government plans to distribute vaccines against tetanus and rabies, while the WHO urgently delivered enough medicine to treat about 400,000 people. Psychological problems are an issue for many survivors too, with many reportedly suffering from PTSD. Field doctors in Turkey have reportedly been treating an increasing number of patients suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and panic attacks, with some ships being turned into makeshift trauma wards.
Now more of the patients are coming with the post-traumatic stress disorder, all the shock that they have gone through during the earthquake, and all whatever they have seen. Because of that, patients are having panic attacks. There's a good number of people who are coming as a panic attack.
Now, the WHO is requesting that the international community donate more funds, as the UN Health Agency says that more than 2.6 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Now, Turkey is also transitioning into the recovery and reconstruction phases. To help the much-needed project, a second group of rescue workers from South Korea will leave for Adana in southern Turkey tonight. Our Bae Eun-ji reports.
Another relief team, along with more than 50 tons of humanitarian aid, will be sent from South Korea to Turkey. The South Korean government announced this plan on Wednesday during a meeting led by the country's foreign minister Park Jin.
2 military transport aircraft and a commercial flight will be mobilized to send the team and deliver 55 tons of supplies, including tents and blankets.
The supplies will include more than 1,000 tents, as well as around 3,000 blankets and 2,000 sleeping bags. And the 21-member team, including 10 medical workers, will depart Seoul at 11 p.m. on Thursday. They will be sent to Adana, southern Turkey. Unlike the first round of relief personnel sent to the region that worked on rescuing survivors, an official from the foreign ministry explained the new team, formed upon Turkey's request, will focus on identifying what's needed to support the recovery efforts. This comes as Turkey has turned its focus on reconstruction and now encourages those in quake-hit areas whose buildings have been deemed safe to return home. Last week, South Korea had sent a 118-member rescue team, search dogs, and medical supplies to Antakya, one of the hardest-hit regions in Turkey. The team, mostly comprised of military personnel and firefighters, rescued a total of 8 survivors. They will wrap up their week-long operation and head back home on Friday. Bae Eun-ji, Arirang News.
Mpox, previously known as monkeypox, is still a global public health emergency. This is according to the World Health Organization, which says the threat still remains in many countries, suffering from underdetection and underreporting. Our Lee Si-hoo reports.
The World Health Organization has determined that Mpox, previously known as monkeypox, is still considered a public health emergency of international concern. WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, speaking to the press on Wednesday, said the decision follows the advice of the UN Health Agency's Emergency Committee. Mpox, which spreads via close contact and causes flu-like symptoms and skin lesions, was declared a global health emergency by the WHO in July 2022. The health agency maintained its alert in November. Its committee of experts in its meeting last week did acknowledge the decline in Mpox infections around the world. The committee said that since the fourth quarter of 2022, the outbreak has subsided globally. In fact, global infections have declined from more than 1,000 new infections a day at their peak in the summer of 2022 to less than 70 a day during the month of January this year. However, the committee took into consideration the fact that the virus still remains a threat in some countries, especially countries in Africa with low testing rates and weak surveillance systems. Dr. Tedros pointed out that more than 30 countries continue to report cases, and the possible underdetection and underreporting of confirmed cases in some regions are concerning. The WHO's Emergency Committee will reconvene in 3 months to reassess the situation. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
From this Saturday, Beijing will resume issuing short-term visas for South Korean travelers. Now, this comes as Seoul made a similar decision last week. Our Moon Hae-ryun has more.
The Chinese embassy in Seoul on Wednesday announced that it will now be resuming the issuance of short-term and arrival visas for Korean travelers, as well as allowing transit stays for 72 and 144 hours. The measures take effect starting Saturday. The announcement comes 44 days after the Korean government introduced travel restrictions for travelers from China due to a surge in COVID-19 cases there. On January 2nd, South Korea stopped the issuance of short-term visas, required negative PCR tests, and registration on the Quarantine Information Pre-Entry System, Q-code, before arrival. It also restricted the number of flights from China. Beijing responded with a series of similar measures. On January 10th, it halted short-term visas for Korean nationals, and the next day restricted transit stays. China lifted its visa restrictions for Japanese nationals on January 29th, but after Seoul decided to maintain its quarantine measures, Beijing began to request COVID testing for all arrivals from Korea. Although both countries are now issuing short-term visas again, there are still some quarantine measures in place. For instance, Chinese travelers need to submit a negative PCR test and register with Q-code before arrival in South Korea. South Korea has also not been included in the group of 20 countries that China has resumed group tours for. The number of flights between the two countries remains low, but diplomats expect the two sides to soon begin discussions on increasing the number to 100 per week. The next step is expected to be the Korean government looking to phase out the current quarantine measures in place for Chinese travelers. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Today, February the 16th, is dear to the hearts of people in North Korea, as the day marks the birthday of the regime's late leader, Kim Jong-il. The so-called Day of the Shining Star marks the 81st anniversary this year. For more, let's turn to Mr. Bruce Bennett, a policy analyst from Rand Corporation. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. First off, why is Kim Jong-il's birthday, the Day of the Shining Star, so dear to North Korea and North Koreans?
Well, it's easy for Korean people to look at former leaders and have great respect for them. Sometimes it's harder with Kim Jong-il because he's failing in so many ways. But certainly his grandfather was greatly respected. His father now can be more respected as well. So I think it has to do with tradition And you look at even their lapel pins are grandfather and father pins, not Kim Jong-un.
Okay, then last year, let's go back to last year. The North celebrated the 80th birthday anniversary of Kim Jong-il with a music concert and gun salutes. How do you think the regime will celebrate this year? I mean, will there be some sort of military activities? What do you think?
As far as I know, they haven't announced that, so this is supposition. We have to do a little speculation and say, I think the regime is going to want to capture some attention of the North Korean people, but also of the outside world. Kim Jong-un really likes outside attention, media attention. And so with Ukraine going on, with U.S. and China concerns and so forth, he's not been getting the media coverage he likes. So he's undoubtedly going to take some actions, I would think, to capture outside media attention, because after all, he is the leader of what he claims is a very powerful country. If he's not getting media attention from the outside and his senior leadership knows what's happening there, then he doesn't look like he's all that powerful.
Right. You're saying that he could use his father's birthday as an opportunity to show off again, right?
Exactly, to capture attention.
Right. And also, speaking of birthdays of Kim Jong-il as well as the North's founding leader Kim Il-sung are considered the regime's biggest holidays. But the current leader Kim Jong-un's is yet to be recognized as a holiday. What makes their birthdays more significant than Kim Jong-un's?
We don't know for sure, but my assumption is Kim Jong-un is a very brutal leader. He is someone who even the elites have got to be questioning. You know, almost all of the elites have had relatives, uncles, cousins who have been killed by Kim Jong-un. And so I think he's careful not to be too overwhelming. Everyone knows they need to do exactly what he says, and even then they're at serious risk. But I think he's just trying to avoid going too far in putting pressure on his people and instead trying to focus on his father and his grandfather, knowing that he is of the same line. If he respects them, the people of North Korea are going to respect him.
Right. I'm sure Kim Jong-un himself knows very well about the economic burden and difficulties that his people are going through at the moment.
Exactly. I mean, the reports on the food situation in North Korea are a disaster. Starvation probably starting, maybe not as bad as in the late 90s, but still probably pretty serious this year. That is a serious concern. And internally, the concern is his people are going to think he's a failure. Right.
So much more to think about other than just birthdays.
Yes, indeed.
All right. Thank you so much for your time this morning and evening for you.
Thank you.
More measures are rolled out to fight inflation here in South Korea. Public service costs will be kept the same for the first half of the year, and President Yoon Suk-yeol also called on essential industries to do more to alleviate the economic burden on the public. Our presidential office correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
Amid high inflation and economic hardship across the world, President Yoon Suk-yeol on Wednesday called on the financial services and telecommunications industries to step up in response to inflation and economic hardship.
통신 금융 분야는 공공재 성격이 강하고 과점 상태를 유지하고 있는 정부의 특허 사업입니다. 많이 어려운 서민 가게에 큰 영향을 미치는 것인 만큼 정부 차원의 제도 개선 노력과 함께 업계에서도 물가 안정을 위한 고통 분담에 자발적으로 참여할 필요가 있다고 생각합니다.
He also asked relevant ministries and agency chiefs to come up with measures to boost competition in those two areas. For example, phone services in South Korea since 2001 have centered on three main providers, SK, KT, and LG. That said, according to the presidential office, a lack of investment into the industry has stymied growth.
Choice is limited in terms of data plans because the companies don't really differ from one another. When you look at 5G, there are plans with either little data or unlimited data. But unlike other countries, South Korea does not yet have plans between 40 gigabytes to 100 gigabytes.
For the financial services industry, Che said lowering the barriers between IT services and commercial banks could foster more competition in the industry, but there are not yet specific plans for either. President Yoon's comments came as he chaired the 13th Emergency Economy meeting with his cabinet. The goal is to cut living costs for the working people to improve their livelihoods, especially amid the current inflation. Apart from phone bills and financial services, President Yoon also said the costs of public services run by the central government, such as railway tickets, tolls on expressways, and postal services, will be kept the same for the first half of this year. In addition, the presidential office said gas bills will inevitably go up, but promised to slow down the rate of increase while helping low-income households pay for their heating, with support of up to 590,000 won each, or up to $460. In the meantime, the presidential office also asked local governments for their cooperation in trying to keep down the cost of public services. It said the central government will try to share the burden and give them subsidies as incentives. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
South Korea's finance minister says the government will work to improve the country's trade balance by diversifying the market and strengthening other export products. During the emergency economy ministers meeting earlier in the morning, Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho addressed the issue of falling exports and the balance of trade. He attributed the decline in exports to several factors, including the rise of energy prices, a slowdown in demand for semiconductors, and how China's reopening has not yet had a significant impact on the global economy. The minister also urged the citizens to join the government in a collective effort to save energy to help reduce the demand for energy imports. Retail sales in the U.S. bounced back sharply in January amid persisting inflation. According to the U.S. Department of Commerce on Wednesday, retail sales jumped 3% last month over December's level, the biggest increase in 2 years. Spending grew in almost all categories, led by restaurants, motor vehicle, and furniture sales. The data shows that Americans have not pulled back on spending despite high inflation on the back of a strong labor market. While strong consumer and labor demand signal economic recovery, they also indicate more rate hikes ahead to prevent prices from heating up further. Data from the Labor Department on Tuesday showed inflation remained hotter than expected. For a look at the news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley joining us here in the studio. Good morning, Matthew.
Good morning, Dami.
Let's start in Scotland, where the country's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has announced that she's resigning.
Well, that's right. Speaking at a press conference in Edinburgh on Wednesday local time, the leader of the Scottish National Party said her decision was made after long and deep assessments, and that it's the right time to step down. Now, Sturgeon's resignation comes amid political headwinds, including issues on gender reforms, transgender prisoners, and disagreements on how the SNP can achieve its goal of Scottish independence from the UK. But the 52-year-old insisted that these were not factors in her decision to resign. After over 8 years on the job, Sturgeon is the country's longest-serving First Minister and the first woman to have held the role. She will hold the First Minister seat until a successor is chosen. Now, staying in the UK, one of the Thai boys famously rescued in 2018 after being trapped in a flooded cave has died. Reports say that Dwangpech Promtep passed away on Tuesday. Promtep had been found unconscious in his dorm in Leicestershire on Sunday before being taken to hospital. And while UK authorities say his death is not being treated as suspicious, Reports from Thailand claim he had suffered a head injury. Also known as Dom, the 17-year-old had been enrolled in the Brookhouse College Football Academy since 2022 after winning a scholarship. The aspiring football player and his football team garnered global attention following their daring rescue after 2 weeks in a cave in Thailand's Chiang Rai province. Focusing on Antarctica now, where the so-called Doomsday Glacier could be at risk of collapse. The Thwaites Glacier, which is about the size of Florida, got its Doomsday nickname because if it melted completely, sea levels would rise by 0.5 meters. And 2 studies published in the journal Nature on Wednesday say that weak spots that connect its ice shelf to the ocean floor are melting. If the ice shelf melts, this could lead to rapid melting of the glacier. It would also put nearby glaciers at risk of melting too. These have a combined potential to raise global sea levels by 3 meters. And finally, U.S. actress and model Raquel Welch has died at the age of 82. According to her manager, she died peacefully on Wednesday morning local time after a brief illness. Credited with paving the way for action heroines, Welch shot to stardom after appearing in the 1966 sci-fi film Fantastic Voyage. She also became a sex icon after her bikini-clad cavewoman appearance in 1 Million Years BC. Welch's career saw her bag 70 film and television credits and work with the likes of Elvis Presley and Frank Sinatra. She also won a Golden Globe Award for her performance in the 1974 edition of The Three Musketeers. Welch was born in 1940 as Jo Raquel Tejada and grew up in California.
Good morning. It's a cloudy but mild and calm start to the day. Morning temperatures are about 4 degrees higher than the same time yesterday here in the capital. But unlike Wednesday, when we had a nice warm-up in the afternoon, highs will be about 4 degrees lower this afternoon, hovering right around the seasonal norms. Central parts of the country could see a light mix of rain and snow through the afternoon. And mountainous regions on Jeju could see 1 to 5 centimeters of heavy snowfall with a heavy snow advisory issued there. Now, afternoon highs in central regions will be 2 to 3 degrees lower this afternoon, topping out at 5 degrees Celsius here in the capital. But those of you in the southern provinces will notice highs going slightly higher than yesterday to 8 degrees Celsius in Daegu and Gyeongju, Gwangju topping out at 7 degrees Celsius. Now, there will be a brief warm-up from tomorrow into the weekend. Then rain that was forecast to drop in southern parts of the country will actually fall nationwide this weekend. With that in mind, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
That wraps up today's New Day at Arirang. Do stay with us for more updates throughout the day. Thanks for watching.